This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Welcome to CGTN. This is The World Today. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and these are your top stories. NASA launches a mission to kick an asteroid off course in a test to protect Earth from future potential danger. The Biden administration plans to release emergency oil reserves to fight rising inflation and supply shortages. More countries urge their nationals to leave Ethiopia as Prime Minister Abiy vows to go to the front line to lead the battle. In our top story, China says it is firmly opposed to the United States inviting Taiwan to what it calls a summit for democracy next month. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory. He said the invitation was a reappearance of Cold War thinking, which is widely questioned and opposed by the international community.
The
One China principle is a universally recognized norm in international relations. Taiwan has no other status in international law except as a part of China. What the United States has done just proves that democracy is just a lie. It is a tool used by the United States to promote its geostrategic objectives, suppress other countries, split the world, and serve itself and its own interests.
Meanwhile, China also expressed opposition to the official exchanges between the U.S. and Taiwan, urging Washington to abide by the One China principle and stop any form of official contact with Taiwan, as well as to stop influencing Taiwan secessionists. Now, NASA has launched a spacecraft that is going to deliberately smash into an asteroid. The mission is seen as a test run should humanity ever need to stop a giant space rock from destroying life on Earth. The DART experiment blasted off aboard a SpaceX rocket from a California facility a few hours ago, with impact expected late next year. The goal is to alter the trajectory of a moonlet around 160 meters wide. Scientists say while the asteroid poses no threat, they hope to learn how to deflect future danger. The U.S. Labor Department's Bureau of Statistics reported earlier this month that U.S. consumer prices in October posted their biggest annual gain in 31 years. And on Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden tapped the U.S. strategic oil reserves in a bid to reassure Americans who are angry about inflation and goods shortages as they head off to Thanksgiving. CGTN's Nathan King reports from the White House.
As Americans prepare for Thanksgiving on Thursday, President Biden is trying to assure or reassure them that they should be thankful for the state of the U.S. economy.
The fact is, America has a lot to be proud of. We're experiencing the strongest economic recovery in the world. Even after accounting for inflation, our economy is bigger and our families have more money in their pockets than they did before the pandemic. And America is the only major economy in the world that can say that.
But the surging price of everything, from the traditional turkey meal to the fuel that power their cars to drive them to see family and friends, are making consumers very nervous. And while the Biden administration tries to exude confidence, its decision to release 50 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves in a bid to lower prices suggests it's as nervous about inflation as everyone else. Inflation hasn't been this bad in more than 30 years, and with supply chains still snarled, Christmas presents will be hard to find and cost more. Thanks could give way to anger. Then there's the ever-present threat of a winter COVID-19 resurgence, adding to the uncertainty. President Biden, touting his recent legislative success on U.S. infrastructure, says Americans are already better off by nearly $100 a month, and says that his Build Back Better bill will deliver even more. But the opinion polls tell a slightly different story. Biden's approval rating in the polls hovers around 43%. And there's a real fear amongst White House officials here and Democrats generally that with midterm elections for Congress and elsewhere just a year away, that Americans' economic anxieties could lead to political reversal for the White House and Democrats in 2022. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Now, oil reserves are used by countries around the world in case of emergencies. U.S. strategic oil reserves total over 600 million barrels. Now, that's enough to last 1 month. The reserves are located on the coast of Texas and Louisiana. The U.S. says the release has been coordinated with 5 other countries. India has agreed to release 5 million barrels, the UK 1.5 million, and Japan will auction off 4.2 million barrels from its reserves. China and South Korea have yet to release details on the amount or timing of their releases. Well, Japan says it will be pitching in to help curb surging energy prices, with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida planning to release some of the country's oil reserves. Details are expected to be announced on Wednesday. The move is to cool rising crude prices after global producers ignored calls to resupply. Right, let's turn to Turkey now, where anxious shop owners are burning what appears to be fake dollars on the streets on Tuesday. Now, this comes as the Turkish lira saw a 15% free fall against the dollar. The currency's weeks-long losing streak is now its longest in 20 years. It's driven up prices, affecting daily life. The latest sell-off came after President Erdogan pressured the central bank to slash interest rates. He says the move will boost exports, investments and jobs. But critics say it will further fuel double-digit inflation and erode the currency. The lira, the lira has been by far the worst performer globally this year after losing 42% of its value. Right, let's go to Ethiopia now with news just in. State media is reporting that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has gone directly to the war effort from the front line. Deputy Prime Minister Demeke Mekonnen Hassan will take charge of routine government business in Abiy's absence. Meanwhile, more Western countries have told their citizens to leave Ethiopia as alarm mounts over the escalating war in the country. The United Nations has ordered the immediate evacuation of family of its international staff. 46 people have been killed, including a dozen children, after a tourist bus caught fire and crashed in Bulgaria on Tuesday. It is Europe's deadliest road accident in a decade. CGTN's Linda Kennedy has more.
As daylight came, the wreckage on Bulgaria's Struma highway was visible. The tourist bus was burnt out, seemingly having hit a highway barrier before or after bursting into flames. The crash happened at 2 a.m. local time on Tuesday morning, west of the Bulgarian capital Sofia. A Belgian and a Serb are now known to have been on board, along with North Macedonian holidaymakers on their way back from a holiday weekend in Istanbul. Emergency services and Bulgarian authorities arrived to find Bulgaria's most deadly bus crash.
Not everyone can stand such a picture. The picture is terrifying. The details of this tragedy will be investigated. It is hard to look there, hard to look. I do not know if we should go into the details at these early hours. Maybe we should leave it for a later hour. In my experience, I have never seen anything like this.
At the Piragov Emergency Hospital in Sofia, 7 survivors are in good condition, according to the hospital director. They're thought to have been at the back of the bus and have broken a window to jump out. North Macedonia's foreign minister visited them. On Tuesday, the highway remains blocked off, with only vehicles from the emergency services being allowed through.
The Prime Ministers of Bulgaria and North Macedonia described the bus crash in similar terms. Both called it a tragedy on a large scale. The investigation to find the cause will be a priority for both countries. Linda Kennedy, CGTN.
The chief of the International Atomic Energy Agency says he wants to deepen cooperation with Iran. Rafael Grossi made the remarks after talking with Mohammad Eslami, head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, on Tuesday. He also met with Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian for the first time. Ehsan Kevani has more from Tehran.
Rafael Grossi was eager to visit Iran and meet the officials to discuss the UN watchdog's access to surveillance cameras at nuclear facilities in Iran. After meeting the head of Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Grossi met Foreign Minister Abdullahian for the first time. During the meeting, the IAEA chief said he is ready to settle down the remaining technical issues between Tehran and the watchdog as soon as possible through goodwill and also to close cooperation with Tehran. Iran's foreign minister emphasized that from Tehran's perspective, the watchdog should go forward with Iran based on its technical tasks. He urged the IAEA to avoid taking political positions. During the past few years, whenever the watchdog focused on technical issues, Iran cooperated more efficiently, but whenever the political pressures from the European parties or Washington on the IAEA led to reports against Tehran, the process of cooperation between Tehran and the watchdog deteriorated, in fact. Iranian officials say issuing biased reports on Iran will undermine the constructive process of cooperation.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 48 hours of rain.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
More countries urge their nationals to leave Ethiopia as Prime Minister Abiy vows to lead the battle on the front line. The US to release emergency oil reserves. What does this mean for countries in Africa? And Somalia's Prime Minister declares a state of emergency in the wake of the country's worsening drought. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up in the hour. The International Monetary Fund issues conditions to fund South Sudan's ailing economy. And in sports, Uganda's amputee football team set for the Africa Nations Championships in Tanzania. We start with some breaking news now. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has gone to direct the war effort from the front lines. That's according to state-affiliated media. Deputy Prime Minister Demeke Mekonnen Hassan will now take charge of routine government business in Abiy's absence. Meanwhile, more Western countries have told their citizens to leave Ethiopia as alarm mounts over the escalating war in the country. The United Nations has ordered the immediate evacuation of the family of its international staff. The order comes as the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, reports it is advancing towards the capital, Addis Ababa. Well, let's go live now to Addis, where we're joined by CGTN's Girum Chala with the latest. Girum, just give us an update as to what is happening in the conflict at the moment. We understand the Prime Minister has gone to direct the war effort. In particular, what more can you tell us about this?
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has announced on his social media page yesterday that he will be leading the ongoing war against the TPLF force from the battlefield. This was unexpected, and the whole country heard about it. And now we have heard, and it's according to the Ethiopian Ministry of Communication Services, that the Prime Minister, in fact, is now at the battlefield in different fronts, leading the Ethiopian National Defense Force, the Amhara militia, and also the Afar militia and special force at the same time. He is actively engaged, according to the ministry, and also giving important military decisions at the same time. But then again, when the Prime Minister is away, while the Prime Minister is away, Deputy Prime Minister Demeke Mekonnen will be in charge, and he will be doing other government jobs here in the capital, Addis Ababa. So war in the north has continued. The Prime Minister is now leading this war and leaving all the jobs behind for the Deputy Prime Minister himself. And also we can confirm that TPLF forces are also saying that they are determined to continue the war against the Ethiopian force. So in general terms, Lindy, we can confirm that war is now.
It appears we have lost Girum Chala there, but all right, I think we have Girum Chala back with us. Girum, you do mention, of course, that the TPLF forces are very much engaged in this battle and are advancing southward. Can you tell us a little bit more about their advance and whether or not there's growing concern in the more southern regions of Ethiopia?
So, Lindy, as you know, the Tigrayan force, the TPLF more particularly, have been holding strategic locations from Waldea city to Kombolcha and Dese and some other cities closer to Addis Ababa. 250, 270 kilometers away they are, according to reports. And they say that they are determined to push and get to the capital, Addis Ababa, at the same time. This is according to Getachew Reda, the spokesperson of the TPLF force. The Ethiopian National Defense Force are saying that they are repelling them. In fact, there are unverified reports of the release of some strategic locations from the TPLF force. And now are now in control of the Ethiopian National Defense Force, but we cannot confirm which areas these are until we get robust information about it. But in general terms, Lindy, war has intensified. It has entered to a new chapter, as the Prime Minister has entered earlier, and now TPLF is also saying they are determined. In general terms, also, people in this country are answering the calls by the Prime Minister, joining hands with him, heading to the battlefield. So many buses filled with different people from different walks of lives are heading to the battlefield in support of this ongoing war in Ethiopia in general terms. So the African Union is still calling for peaceful resolution of this conflict. The UN is saying the same thing, and also the United States. But yet again, the war has continued, Lindy.
Well, thank you so much for that update. That's Girum Chala reporting from Addis Ababa. Well, let's bring you more now on this conflict. Of course, as we're hearing, war is intensifying despite calls for peace coming from the likes of the African Union and the United Nations. We are now joined by Samuel Getachew, an independent journalist based in Ethiopia, for some analysis on the conflict. Samuel, of course, this conflict has attracted a lot of interest, both regionally and internationally. There's even been concerns raised from countries in the West, among them the United States. But Samuel, what do you think are the core interests of Western nations in this conflict?
I think it's a good question to ask them, but my observation is there is always American interest that is happening in many countries. But from the perspective of Ethiopia and Ethiopians, there is a very mainstream assumption that the US is really looking for perhaps a government change in Ethiopia. Ethiopians often look at the experiences they had in terms of getting involved in local issues, like in countries like Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, too many to count. And this is where we are. But again, the US, the Biden administration has really been a wedge issue among Ethiopians. There are those that really want the US to get involved. There are many Ethiopians that are saying the US shouldn't get involved. But again, this conflict is a wedge issue among Ethiopians.
Well, of course, at some point, Abiy Ahmed was the darling of the world. In 2019, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. It's fair to say that he has attracted a lot of criticism since. What then, or what is the US's position, do you think, on Abiy Ahmed? Do they still see any possibility or potential of making him an ally of Western nations, or the United States in particular?
I mean, the US has always had this vision they call American interest. And, you know, we've seen them, historical terms, where they switch sides between the opposition and the government in many countries. And I'm sure Ethiopia is no exception. But they did support him at the beginning. They did support him. There were much support coming even from the era of Trump, saying that he was the one that will really historical milestones in terms of having issues of famine that really defined Ethiopia in the 1984-85 years, and also endless conflicts and displacement of many people. And every country that wants to come to Ethiopia obviously has its own interest. The European Union wanting to really push the migrants to stay put within their own countries and not come to their soil. The US really wanting to really compete with China, for instance. Even Turkey, which has been having more power, nation in the Horn of Africa, a population of more than 110 million people, an economy that was really moving forward. But again, this conflict has really impacted on the ground, including its image around the world.
And you mentioned, Samuel, of course, the risk of foreign intervention, that this could evolve into a situation like Libya. How do we stop that from happening?
Well, you know, there are those people that say that peaceful engagement should be the way to move forward. This is part of the African Union's vision of having African solution to African problems. They've been saying for a long time. The African Union envoy, the former president of Nigeria, Mr. Obasanjo, has been saying there is a window of opportunity to really solve this and end this conflict because this conflict has really impacted millions of people. More than 2 million people have been displaced, and it's a conflict that's painfully really defined by sexual exploitation of women. And the allegations are not just one-sided, but they accuse, even the UN report that came out a few weeks ago with the partnership of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission says all actors, all parties were involved. And I hope that's the down payment we need in terms of having more reports come forward so people could at least know exactly what happened and find a roadmap on how Ethiopia could move forward. But it's been a painful year.
Indeed. And of course, at this point, Samuel, it may be too soon to try and look to the future. But would you say that this conflict has potentially changed the course of Ethiopia's trajectory as far as what is happening and what the future may look like?
Well, I've always said, you wake up, you sleep on one reality and you wake up on a different reality in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is just moving forward, even for me or for someone who's observing it from here. But the fact is, Ethiopia has to find a way to move forward. It's not just impacting everyday Ethiopians. It's also creating the image that Ethiopia is not stable enough for foreign investment to come to this country. The French, the Turkish citizens are even living today, as of today, because their embassies has said Ethiopia is not safe for you, so you have to leave. So all this will add up at the end of the day in terms of how important is foreign investment. That's how Ethiopia really changed its image in the last few years, moving from an aid-dependent nation to a country that was really looking at being self-sufficient instead of being a country that really the world looked down on and sent money as a donation. But again, Ethiopia has to find a way to move forward. And historically, Ethiopia has been an important nation. It played a role in the formation of the African Union. It also helped Nelson Mandela get military training.
It appears we have lost Samuel Gatechu there, but we do thank him for sharing those insights with us. Let's turn to the latest in Sudan now. Reinstated Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is set to review appointments and dismissals made by the military since their takeover on October 25th. Hamdok was reinstituted on Sunday after signing a 14-point agreement with military chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Political leaders and analysts have expressed their thoughts on the agreement.
The situation now is very, very critical. I think that Hamdok gave life or oxygen to al-Burhan with this procedure. Al-Burhan was completely besieged by the international community and completely besieged from the inside by a comprehensive rejection of this coup. But now there's a shift in the opinion of the international community. It appears, therefore, that the international community, the military, and Hamdok are now facing the Sudanese people.
This agreement, which has found great public and popular support, will put an end to the political crisis. It represents a new platform for launching and ensuring the civil democratic transition, which requires us to move forward by learning from the practices of the previous period and building on that, and looking forward to a bright future through which we can achieve the goals of the glorious December Revolution.
If Hamdok wants to build a bridge of trust between him and the street, he must take real steps to ensure that his return is different from his predecessors, that all decisions taken by al-Burhan must be reviewed and turned against the constitutional document, and that things return to how they were before October 25th. So this issue is what Hamdok will do in the coming days, especially since the form of the agreement he made with al-Burhan is still vague and unknown, and these ambiguities need to be revealed.
U.S. President Joe Biden has ordered the release of 50 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The exercise is expected to start from mid-next month. 32 million barrels will be returned to the reserve in years to come, while another 18 million are an oil sale that was previously authorized by Congress. This is part of a global initiative to bring down energy costs and deal with a lack of supply, which is hoped will in turn ease prices. The move is in coordination with other major energy-consuming nations, namely China, India, the UK, Japan and South Korea. Delegates from the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries have criticized the move as unjustified, stating that oil-producing nations may have to adjust current plans to boost production. Well, oil reserves are used by countries around the world in case of emergencies. U.S. strategic oil reserves total over 600 million barrels. That's enough to last 1 month. The reserves are located on the coast of Texas and Louisiana. The U.S. says the release has been coordinated with 5 other countries. India has agreed to release 5 million barrels, the UK 1.5 million, and Japan will auction off 4.2 million barrels from its reserves. China and South Korea have yet to release details on the amount and the timing of their releases. You're watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Coming up, the Somali Prime Minister declares a state of emergency in the wake of the country's worsening drought. And Uganda arrests 4 over a suspected explosive device. Somali Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble has declared a state of emergency over the deadly drought plaguing the Horn of Africa nation. Roble made the announcement after chairing an extraordinary cabinet meeting on Tuesday. The Somali Prime Minister has called on citizens as well as the international community to assist those affected. The United Nations puts at 3.5 million the number of Somalis facing acute food shortages. Climate projections by the UN indicate that the country is facing a 4th consecutive failed rain season. In Uganda, joint anti-terror security agencies say they've detained 4 Somali nationals after recovering a suspected bomb device in their car. The suspects were apprehended while trying to access a Speak Resort Hotel Munyonyo in the suburbs of Kampala. Meanwhile, Ugandan police say they've rescued over 80 children undergoing military training from terror cells across the central and western parts of the country. Leon Senyange reports.
The authorities say the children are gathered from different parts of the capital Kampala. Others were in Kasese in the western part of the country. Police say the teenage children were being trained in weapon handling, detonating and planting bombs, among other military skills. Police are working to reunite the children with their families.
These children were rescued. They are in a shelter home, and the arrangements to reintegrate and reunite them with their parents, guardians and relatives. We also managed to rescue and recover 3 children who found their way from Bunia in the DRC, 7 from Kasese, 6 from Karugutu.
50 other children had earlier been rescued by the authorities, who continue to monitor homes and places of worship, which are centers of recruitment. The intensified searches follow last week's twin bomb attacks in the capital Kampala that left 7 people dead. More than 30 people, mostly police officers, were injured. Authorities in Uganda have blamed the Allied Democratic Forces, which is said to be an affiliate to ISIL, for the attack. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Kenyan counterpart, President Uhuru Kenyatta, have announced a joint task team that has been set up to ease travel and address any visa-related challenges between the two countries. This emerged during Kenyatta's state visit to South Africa at the invitation of Ramaphosa. The three-day visit will continue until Wednesday. CGTN's Lindy Mtongana has more.
South Africa and Kenya share long-standing, mutually beneficial relations that predate Kenya's historic support for the struggle against apartheid and colonialism here in South Africa. On this particular visit, the two leaders were accompanied by senior cabinet ministers from both countries. The visit is geared towards deepening the existing mutually beneficial ties between Kenya and South Africa.
President Kenyatta and I have reaffirmed the strategic importance of bilateral relations between our two countries and reiterated our desire to elevate the nature of our relationship, which would include the conclusion of a strategic partnership agreement.
They also explored new areas to deepen the fraternal ties between Nairobi and Pretoria.
We have witnessed today the signing of 8 agreements covering a wide range of issues, including health cooperation, diplomatic consultations, training and cooperation in fields of tourism and air services, all very key to both our countries.
During their meeting, the two leaders also shared perspectives on various issues of mutual importance, such as continental and international developments. Presidents Ramaphosa and Kenyatta also acknowledged the signing of the strategic partnership framework between South African Airways and Kenyan Airways. While acknowledging that partnership, the two leaders also reflected on how trade between the two nations need to be more balanced. South Africa exports billions of US dollars worth of goods to Kenya. This is against imports worth only millions of US dollars from Kenya.
We therefore welcome the announcement that South African Airways and Kenya Airways have agreed on a strategic partnership framework towards the creation of a pan-African airline group that draws on the capabilities and the advantages of our two nations. We will be working together to identify Kenyan export products for which there are great growth opportunities in South Africa. We're also committed to investing more in each other's economies.
What I am particularly happy about is the level of commitment at the highest level possible that we have seen today in terms of reversing that situation and to have a much more balanced situation prevail in terms of trade between our two countries. A much more balanced and increase in terms of volume, in terms of volume of goods, but also in terms of the amount of actual transactions that are actually done between our two countries.
President Kenyatta has other engagements while here. President Kenyatta's program includes a visit to Transnet Engineering, a visit that will allow South Africa an opportunity to showcase its capabilities in supply and maintenance of rail-related technology. Lindy Mtongana for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Let's revisit our story on U.S. plans to release 50 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The exercise is expected to start from mid-next month. It's part of a global initiative to bring down energy costs and deal with a lack of supply, which is hoped will in turn ease prices. Now, joining us to discuss this is Ken Gichinga, an economist based in Nairobi. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken. Tell us, what does releasing U.S. oil reserves mean for oil-producing countries?
Well, many thanks. There has been a concern that global prices of fuel have gone up. They're at a 7-year high. And the U.S. is leading this initiative in releasing about 50 million barrels with the expectation that it will reduce the price of fuel, which is really hurting not only American consumers, but consumers around the world, particularly as we start getting into the winter period in those countries.
Thank you so much for that, Ken Gichinga, joining us there via Zoom from Nairobi. You are watching Africa Live. Here's what's still ahead on the program. In business, the IMF issues conditions to fund South Sudan's ailing economy. And a South African think tank calls for an exports-driven policy to spur economic recovery. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria has voted to retain the monetary policy rate, which measures interest at 11.5%. The decision to keep rates steady was unanimously supported by members of the committee. That's according to the Apex Bank's Governor, Godwin Emefiele. The overall outlook of the Nigerian economy, according to the MPC, indicates a continuous rebound in economic growth, which is supported by monetary and fiscal policies and stability in the price of crude oil. Nigeria's economy grew just over 4% in the third quarter, its fourth consecutive quarterly rise. The central bank expects inflation to continue to ease towards the end of the year. Now, the International Monetary Fund says support to South Sudan's ailing economy is pegged on the government's willingness to open to an accountability probe. The Washington-based lender wants President Salva Kiir's government to account for past loans, prosecute the corrupt, and improve financial discipline and transparency in use of public resources, especially earnings from oil. IMF Director of the African Department, Adebe Selassie, insisted on the conditions in a meeting with President Kiir and his finance minister in Juba last week. The hope for South Sudan is now pegged on a positive report by the country's Auditor General, who has been tasked with investigating how funds have been spent in recent years. And to Tanzania now, where President Samia Suluhu Hassan's government is set to receive a zero-rated $372 million loan from the IMF to support COVID-19 pandemic relief measures. The latest IMF loan will be issued through the fund's Rapid Credit Facility. It is part of a $567 million package released in September under a blended Rapid Credit Facility and Rapid Financing Instrument program. According to the IMF, recent reporting of COVID-19 data in Tanzania has indicated an increase in the number of cases amid a third wave of the virus. Growth in the East African nation reportedly decelerated to 4.8% in 2020, and economic performance is expected to remain subdued in 2021. South Africa's economic recovery and development strategy, launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa 12 months ago, may not be the optimal approach to the country's recovery. That's according to a new report prepared by a think tank. CGTN's Angela Coppola has more.
The report, prepared by the Centre for Development and Enterprise, suggests that localization, one of the pillars of the new policy as an approach to industrialization and development, won't achieve its goals.
We see this as an anti-export strategy and a strategy that will not increase South Africa's competitiveness as an economy, nor will it increase our competition within the economy. So we think this is the wrong priority and it's a misguided policy.
The country faces several challenges, the biggest being its 12 million unemployed people. Bernstein says this policy is misguided.
It seems attractive to say we want to encourage government to spend money on domestic firms and we'll hold on to the jobs that we have. But we think this is short-sighted, that it fails to appreciate. There will be some firms that benefit from this policy, but it fails to appreciate the costs to government, to the economy as a whole, to consumers, and to our competitiveness.
Part of South Africa's challenge is its distance from all major developed markets, but there's a potential solution closer to hand.
You have a plus 50 country policy program called the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in place, which is trying to promote exactly this. And this would be a first step in the direction then of policy coordination. How would our industrial policy correspond with regional policy? And the African Continental Free Trade Agreement gives some big clues on that.
Another aspect that hasn't been sufficiently investigated in this industrial policy is the skills requirement to make the policy work.
Are they available? Can they be imported? Here, South Africa needs to look to its scarce skills immigration policies. There is a squaring up to that, but I would venture not broad enough and not quick enough.
The Centre for Development and Enterprise is calling for focus on certain key issues.
So get the environment right, fix the labor market regulations, not wholesale, but carefully calibrated reforms, fix our education and skills system. So these are much higher priorities in our view.
South Africa's economic growth rate is languishing at the moment, and government policy needs to change and change quickly in order to take advantage of any opportunities. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The President of the Democratic Republic of Congo has ordered a ban on the issuance and trading of mining permits until the country's mining registry has been audited. President Felix Tshisekedi says the move will help tackle fraud and increase the government's tax revenue from the mining sector. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
The DRC president ordered the ban on the illegal exploitation of minerals during a meeting for the Council of Ministers in the capital, Kinshasa. The ban comes 2 months after Congolese authorities accused some foreign investors of illegally mining gold in the east of the country. President Tshisekedi said he wants to end the squandering of the country's minerals by foreigners and unnamed political actors. The DRC is endowed with vast mineral and forest resources. The country is Africa's top producer of copper, but more than 70% of its population lives in poverty. High levels of corruption and an ongoing conflict in the country's east have made the government lose out on tax revenue. Armed groups in eastern DRC have been engaged in the illegal exploitation of the country's natural resources for over 2 decades. In May this year, the government declared a state of siege in the mineral-rich provinces of Ituri and North Kivu in an attempt to stop attacks against civilians and the illegal mineral trade. But the killings and the illegal exploitation of minerals has continued. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Libya has announced plans to construct a solar plant with Total Energies. The country's Minister of Oil and Gas, Mohamed Oun, announced the plans on Monday. He was speaking at the launch of the 2021 Libya Energy and Economy Summit. The North African country is heavily reliant on oil. OPEC estimates the sector represents 69% of Libya's foreign export earnings. In addition to working with Total to build a solar plant, Oun announced plans to increase Libya's oil production.
The agreement that was signed today is the agreement of Total Energies, which submitted a proposal to establish a 500 megawatt solar power plant on the basis that construction will be completed and its costs will be paid over a period of 25 years.
Well, that's where we leave your business news. Your sports news coming up next. Uganda's amputee football team set for the African Nations Championships in Tanzania.